But it could also be that you develop the associations in your community to help retrain people, right? Or the associations in your community to help people get off their phones and go engage in conversation with other people to see that maybe we're not actually at the verge of civil war like all these videos that I saw scrolling on TikTok showed me that it might be, right? At one point he says that we should just go waste time with each other, right?
Yeah, that was
Where do
interesting.
you do that now, right?
Hey folks, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. We are on a mission to help Catholics start and grow their businesses and do it in a way that helps them to become saints while also bringing other people to know God in the process. As you've likely seen, Pope Leo XIV recently released his encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, which is largely referenced to or referred to as the AI encyclical. It's a lot more than that, as we will discuss today, but we did a summary episode on this recently to give you kind of the gist of what it's about and the high-level components and where you can look for certain information in each chapter. That's episode 69. But I also wanted to have some other commentary on the encyclical. So I invited on a couple people to discuss this on a broader kind of high-level perspective. These people are very plugged into the Catholic tech and AI world. So I brought on Zak Slayback, who is a venture capitalist and a very well-read person on church teachings, especially the encyclicals, as you will hear through his many references to past encyclicals. You can tell he reads a lot. He's very, very sharp on these items. And then Edmund Mitchell, who is a content creator and entrepreneur, who is also very plugged into the AI and Catholic world. And he actually, you might recognize his name because he was on the podcast recently, episode 66. We interviewed him in person in Dallas not too long ago. Just a very interesting character as well. So we brought Zak and Edmund on the show to discuss kind of high level, what are their current perspectives on the encyclical, what are the core things they found interesting. We discussed many components. Even though this is a longer discussion, we still only really scratched the surface. Again, this is a very large document. It's, I think 42 pages printed out on 8 by 11 paper. So it's very dense. So we only scratched the surface. If you would like to hear more of this discussion, if you enjoy it once you've listened to it and you want to hear more of it, please comment in the YouTube comments or on the Substack, or to reach out to me directly to let me know. I'm more than happy to do a round 2 of the discussion and invite these guys back on, but do let us know what your perspective is on there. As a note, before we start, if you are a Catholic business owner or want to be one and you'd like to have a group of peers to learn from and to build alongside, please consider joining the Catholic Founders Guild. The Guild consists primarily of our online community and various group chats that we have inside of there. Then we have a member directory so that you can do business with other Catholics in the group very easily. You can discover them, in other cities or particular professions. And then we also have an AI bot that is trained on our content that we've created, so you can quickly recall certain episodes or principles that were discussed in the writing or the podcast. And then we also host online discussions on a regular basis, usually two times a month, where we talk about a particular topic or bring in an expert to, give us some training on marketing, for example, or other things. The Guild only costs $100 a year to join, so I'm pretty confident in saying it is the best $100 you will spend if you are indeed a Catholic business owner. And then if you would like to get a taste of what the Guild is like, you can actually attend one of our local events if you are in the area. We host events and meetups on a very regular basis throughout different cities. We currently have recurring monthly events in Houston, Dallas, Nashville, and Central Wisconsin. We are working on getting regular meetups in New York City, San Francisco, and the Columbus area, Columbus, Ohio, as well. So check out the show notes for a link to all of our different events. We have a Luma page where you can find everything. And without any further delay, please enjoy this discussion with Zak and Edmund. All right, guys, we are here. We got the squad together. You guys don't know each other yet, do you, Zak and Edmund? Have you guys met before?
No, I like him already, though.
Zak is extremely plugged into online Catholic stuff and online VC world. He is also just very, very knowledgeable when it comes to the faith. But and Edmund's also a newer friend of mine. But we met in Dallas not that long ago. So you guys have both like the encyclical you like to read and understand. I think we'll have a good discussion today. So I'll set it up here. I already did an episode recapping kind of the core summary of the AI encyclical Magnifica Humanitas. So if people want to listen to that, they can check that out. It's episode 69. We're not going to primarily focus on recapping that episode today, that encyclical, we're going to focus on some of our discussion points or the things we found interesting in it, and we can kind of keep it as a free-for-all type of discussion. But if anybody wants to get the core summary points because they haven't heard it yet or haven't read it yet, I would go check that out. It should be 2 episodes ago. So let's start with this. Do you guys want to just give like a really, really brief intro on who you are and what you're up to? Zach, you can go first.
So Zak Slayback converted to Catholicism in 2020, which it was a very fun time in the middle of COVID to do a general confession in an unair-conditioned garage directory. So I thought I died. Maybe it was purgatory. I am a partner at a venture capital fund, pre-seed, seed stage, have been there for about 9 years. On the investing side, probably for about 7 of those years. And in that capacity, also get to work with a lot of very early stage founders, but also get to see those founders from everything from when they're just getting started, when they're ready to go public. So a pretty wide range of companies, a lot of deep tech, hard tech, a little bit of software here and there as well. And have also had the good pleasure to be involved with a number of groups like Cent and others over the years, which some of your listeners might be familiar with.
Of course. I would highly recommend following Zach on Twitter too. A good follow for sure. And then Edmund, you want to give an intro quick?
Yeah, my name is Edmund Mitchell. I'm a Catholic creator and brand strategist, working with Digital Continent, which does a lot of production and projects, one of which is the Faith in AI project. And so that's, interviewing experts and creating content and resources to help people understand, navigate, and harness AI with the wisdom, confidence, and hope of the church. And I have 5 kids and just dabble with tech a lot. So this has been a really fun couple months here. That's me.
In case anybody missed it, we did also have an episode with Edmund recently in Dallas, and he did that really cool debate between Matthew Harvey Sanders and Mark Barnes a while ago. So I'd recommend people check that out. But let's get into it. So I'm kind of curious, Zach, maybe if you want to start us off, can you give us your perspective on why is this encyclical here? Like, why is this important? Why was it published in your own words?
Sure. I think in general, it's helpful to understand what are encyclicals, what is kind of the encyclical tradition, and then what are social encyclicals within that. So when Pope Leo was elected as Robert Cardinal Prevost, he announced that he took the name Leo XIV, and you can find the speech online where he says one of the main reasons he did that is as an homage to Leo XIII, in large part because of his teachings from Rerum Novarum and other social encyclicals. So Leo XIII really starts kind of the encyclical tradition. There's a number of historical reasons for that. There are people who are better versed in that than myself that can break that down. But big reason is you see the collapse of the papal states under Pius IX, and the Pope has to kind of take a different tack in his teaching office rather than sending papal bulls to the local bishops' conferences. You see the development of something like this letter that's written to all the bishops of the church on a number of different topics. The 13th wrote, I want to say 80 encyclicals. It's some crazy big number. But one of those encyclicals is Rerum Novarum, which was signed about 135 years ago, which roughly translates on new things, and was addressing the challenges that were posed by the height of the Industrial Revolution at that point. On the one side being the temptation to the abolition of private property, the rise of what we would later call something like the early stages of communism or Marxist socialism. And on the other side, Gilded Age industrialism that was crushing the worker. And he tries to provide a way to guide the ship of state, the ship of church, the ship of the family, the ship of the economy between those two rocks, right? And it's a notable document because at no point does he say that workers should go and smash the looms or destroy the factories. He actually says, workers really shouldn't engage in violence against their employers, and that employers need to treat those workers well. So it really is kind of like a third way approach. And he proposes he clarifies a Catholic anthropology, which is fundamentally different than the anthropology that you would find from the Marxists or the anthropology that you would find from the liberals. And you find that anthropology through a lot of these social encyclicals, including this one. And then there's this entire tradition of each successive pope offering a social encyclical that has to do with the economy, the politics, the family of the time, at least one typically, but the major ones being Magnifica Humanitas has a great history on the social economic encyclicals. I think it's chapter 1 of the encyclical. I would encourage people to read it if they're just interested in the history of what becomes Catholic social teaching, or at least contemporary Catholic social teaching. So you get Quadragesimo Anno 40 years later by Pius XI. You get Populorum Progresso, you get Pacem in Terris by Paul VI and John the 23rd, respectively. John the 23rd comes first, Paul VI comes later. You get a number of encyclicals from John Paul II, Redemptor Hominis, Laborum Exercum, Centesimus Annus, and then you get some social encyclicals from Benedict XVI and Pope Francis as well. Caritas in Veritate from Benedict XVI is one example. Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti from Pope Francis as well. So the popes have this clear contemporary tradition of writing in the line of addressing problems that the modern world has and taking the principles that the church has through its millennia and throwing a new light on the problems of the day, right? To kind of riff on Gaudium et Spes. I think it's important, though, to understand that popes just aren't kind of sitting around twiddling their thumbs thinking, oh, what can I write about? What will my social encyclical be? I mean, maybe if you're a cardinal and you think, oh, if I'm elected pope, I would like to do a social encyclical this way. But these things work their ways up the hierarchy, right? Like, if something's coming down from the Vatican in general, and especially if it's coming down from the Pope, it's worked its way up there because of the nature of what the Petrine office is as the kind of final say or the ultimate authority on certain matters. So the Vatican's been doing working groups and an alphabet soup of different organizations for years now on the relationship between the human person and artificial intelligence. Under Pope Francis, one of the last documents that came down was a document that was written between the DDF and the Dicastery for Education, I think, called Antiqua et Nova, which is, again, on a very similar set of topics. And it works its way up to the Pope for the Pope to say, here are the principles that we want to consider here. The Pope might lay certain topics to rest. The document might be highly catechetical. There are some encyclicals that are, and Evangelium Vitae is an example of a highly catechetical encyclical. It might be very dense in moral theology. Veritatis Splendor from John Paul II is another one of those. This one is, very broad in terms of principles and a set of topics that it might be useful to address, but it's not necessarily saying, we believe X, Y, and Z about these specific topics. So the Pope's job here, I think, is to reintroduce the world to Catholic social teaching, the principles of Catholic social teaching, that we can then apply those principles to the challenges to the human person in the age of artificial intelligence. I would actually, this is not an original take from me, but a lot of people have referred to this as the AI encyclical. I don't think that's right. I think it is the Catholic social teaching encyclical, the Catholic anthropology encyclical in the age of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that's an interesting point that I saw some people complaining about the length of this thing, and I was like, I think it's important that he did all of the kind of like preamble of helping people understand what Catholic social teaching is, because, and the references to all of the past beliefs, very, like, he did a pretty succinct job, if you ask me, without going over the points too quickly.
Yeah, I would say he primarily was talking on the social economic teachings of Catholic social teaching. And I think it's also really important to think, too, is who is this document for? Traditionally, encyclicals actually say at the beginning who they're addressed to. And Pope Leo points this out in Magnifica Humanitas, that in Pacem in Terris by John the 23rd, it's one of the first encyclicals, which, again, this makes sense if you understand the Second Vatican Council and kind of the shift in the stance towards the modern world that the church then takes around that period. Pacem in Terris is actually addressed to all men of goodwill. And you see a similar language in a lot of the social encyclicals going forward. Evangelium Vitae, for example, has a similar kind of address at the beginning. Veritatis Splendor, which is not really a social encyclical, is kind of a good counterpoint here because it's addressed to my brothers in the episcopate. So it's actually just really addressed to the bishops. So most encyclicals historically have opened up with some kind of address. We see this kind of fall away during Pope Francis, and this encyclical actually doesn't open with that. It doesn't open with, to all men and women of goodwill, or, to the faithful religious in the world, blah, blah, blah. It just opens. But with that in mind, and with it in mind that he points out that Pacem in Terris has this shift towards all men of goodwill, I think this encyclical is primarily written to all men of goodwill, all men and women of goodwill, It's 2026.
Yeah.
And it is really trying to address to everyone who's interested in these problems what the Catholic Church has to say to, again, throw a new light on the problems of the modern day.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely interesting to see the amount of secular people I've seen commenting on social media who are like, "Wow, like this is the best AI take I've ever seen. I think I'm gonna have to become Catholic." Like, obviously it's a little bit hyperbolic, but it is interesting to see that it has appealed to a lot of people because it's gone the idea of not just in AI and technology, but broadly speaking, humans have been kind of treated as numbers for so long with like the private equityization of everything, and everything is just a commodity. It's just a number. People are just data points, and I think people are really sick of it. So, any kind of comments from you on your side, Edmund, about any of this, or your kind of high level take on it?
Yeah, I think Zak's take is spot on. I think I don't think we've ever had an encyclical that came with a trailer. That came with like a 4-minute trailer. So I don't think the bishops really are the ones that need a trailer like that. I think this is Pope Leo and the Vatican doing a good job of being strategic about this encyclical. And I love that Zak's bringing up this point that, the church writes these encyclicals and doesn't want to violate subsidiarity, right? Like it's the bishop's jobs to take what the Pope is laying forward and apply that to their diocese. But also you can't ignore the fact that it's going to bring a lot of media attention, especially when it's on topics that are hot button issues. There's going to be lots of people that are going to want to read it, that are going to be interested in it, that are going to see quotes and things spread around. So the dicastery for, oh man, I'm blanking on the name. The dicastery that put out this document, shared lots of other resources that go along with it. I think there's a pastoral kit, there's infographics that go along with it that kind of summarize things. There you go. Yeah. It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
Anybody can remember that.
But they've done a fantastic job, I think, in the way that they're rolling this out. And I also really, really think people should reflect on what Zak said about this not being an encyclical on AI. Father Jean Gauvet from Archdiocese of Malta was one of our expert panelists, and he brought up a similar point where he said, this isn't an encyclical on AI. This is an encyclical on the age of AI. And so it's about humanity. It's about magnificent humanity in the age of AI, but not on a specific technology.
Mm-hmm. It felt to me that he was addressing a lot of technology broadly. It didn't just seem to focus on AI. And I'm wondering if that's my understanding. I haven't read every encyclical that's been published. It sounds like Zak has, but you've at least read a lot of them based on your references here. But my understanding is there have not been a lot of encyclicals that addressed technology specifically in the past like 20 something years, correct? So is this kind of like catching up on tech broadly?
Just to highlight, because this comes up a lot. I think a lot of people view this as just a technology, like AI is just a tool, and the encyclical comes out against that framing, I think, for a lot of strategic reasons we could get into. But in paragraph 110, it talks about AI as an environment we're already immersed in. So I think Pope Leo is kind of, in my opinion, positioning this as this is just a way to describe the current age is marked by AI, but it affects everything. It's not just a tool that's available. It's changing everything about society and how society and governments and organizations interact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the comparison that I gave while I was discussing this in depth with a friend the other day is I think it's actually the church's stance towards artificial intelligence is fairly similar to the church's stance towards biotechnology, that it's a category of technology that does fundamentally reshape the environment in which people find it. So you find, again, a lot of writing on this. On biotech, you can go back to Costi Connubii, which is Pius XI, writing against eugenics, Paul VI, Humanae Vitae, John Paul II, obviously Evangelium Vitae. What the introduction of these technologies do is it reshapes man's relationship with other people. And there are ways that the technology is used that are inherently evil. And we can, again, point to another encyclical where John Paul II makes it clear we do believe that some actions are gravely evil in and of themselves, but it's more like a category of technology. And that category isn't necessarily neutral, but there are going to be ways we can approach that technology in which the church is going to be very pro-technology. The church is very pro-biotechnology. Popes and dicasteries slash congregations and cardinals and theologians and researchers and doctors and nurses and all these other people have been working on biotechnology for decades, and the church has been at the forefront of a lot of those topics. But there's also a way in which biotechnology, when it is viewed in a certain way and applied in a certain way, treats people as mere means, to take some language that's a little bit more secular. And the church is very concerned about that. And I think it's very, very similar in the sense where we do get a little bit more technology speak in recent pontificates is in Laudato Si, and you do see a lot of explication of principles from Laudato Si in Magnifica Humanitas, and that is the technocratic paradigm, which is not necessarily one of technology, more one of rule by experts and viewing people as inputs and data to be managed and moved around and, again, used as just mere means, but clearly very, very obvious applications to technology, particularly technology that the church says is the processing of data, which is what the category of artificial intelligence is according to the church and Magnifica Humanitas. I think that's where you see some of the negative reactions from the, more like effective altruist, rationalist, hardcore AI crowd, is they're upset that the church does not view AI as a distinct technology that then can have all these specific applications from a metaphysical perspective of like the personhood of AI. And the church is very clear, AI cannot feel, it cannot make moral judgments, it cannot experience things. I find it somewhat humorous. I don't want to read too much into the anthropic involvement in the press conference on the encyclical, because I think it's a little early to do that. But I do find it rather funny that the Anthropic co-founder that was up there says, we see things that it looks like AI says it's feeling things in these ways. And the Anthropic crowd in particular seems to be pretty dedicated to that position. And then the encyclical goes on to essentially contradict that. It doesn't 100% contradict it, because if you look at Ola's remarks, it's along the lines of, it appears that AI feels these things, but then the church says AI does not feel, right? AI does not experience. AI does not make moral judgments. So there is a tension, I think, between those two. But I mean, big point of involving them was to walk together, right? That's the language encyclical. That's the language that's used at the press conference. There were these obnoxious takes the day the press conference happened where people said, the Pope says they're going to work together with Anthropic. And it's like, if you actually listen to it, he says walk together. I know he's got a Chicago accent. Together, and then in the official remarks you find on the Vatican website, it says walk together. But there is, I think, an important view of it as a category of technology that has discrete applications, and those discrete applications are a lot of what we talk about in, like, say, chapter 5 of the encyclical.
Hey folks, as a quick reminder, we have recently launched The Faithful Steward. This is a free private deal flow newsletter for Catholic investors to be made aware of opportunities to invest in other Catholic-owned or led companies or projects. These deal types will range from startup investment opportunities to film opportunities to real estate, anything you can think of, it will be in there. And it's totally free. We are not charging for this. We are just trying to help connect the community. To sign up, you can go to CatholicDealFlow.com. That's CatholicDealFlow.com. How it works is when we get a deal, we make sure that these guys are Catholic. We will then package it up really nicely, send it over to you, and then you can take a look and decide if you would like to reach out. The benefit of this is that you get to remain completely anonymous from all those capital seekers while still getting the benefit of seeing those deals. So you get the benefit of seeing the deals without the publicity of being known. We are not gatekeeping here, so just trying to use our role as a community connector to help Catholics invest in each other, and doing this all again for free. If you are a Catholic builder who is looking to raise capital, whether that again is for a film, for real estate, for a startup, or just a mom and pop or brick and mortar business, you can go to CatholicDealFlow.com to sign up. You just submit your deck there and a bit of information about you. We'll reach out, we'll verify that you are in fact a practicing Catholic, then we'll package it all up and send it out to the newsletter, and if they're interested, they'll reach out to you. Again, that is CatholicDealFlow.com. It's completely free. You can sign up today. All right, back to the show. Now, I am curious to get your guys' perspective on this, because when you read it, some people, in the different circles I'm in, I've seen some people who are, let's say, more populist, and they would maybe be more sympathetic to leftist ideas around socialism or whatever. They're like, they read this and say, oh, this is just like, this is great, like this is basically socialism. He's promoting like redistribution or whatever. And then you've got some people who are more on the right and who are like, no, this is like, this is crazy. We don't want this. I'm just kind of curious to get your perspectives on this and how we can understand to look at something like this. And if we have, let's say in America, especially, we have maybe left or right leanings depending on our political perspectives, and we will read this and we will read it as like Democrat or Republican like takes, right? How can we separate that out as we're reading through this? Either of you, your perspective on this?
I mean, I think that is the wrong paradigm to use to analyze anything that comes down from the church. The church predates the left-right paradigm pretty significantly, but it's also a very common reaction you tend to see from social encyclicals and from popes in general, right? Like, again, if we go back to like first principles on what is Pope Leo building on here, and what does he cite back to, right? He's building on Catholic social teaching and in the contemporary tradition of Catholic social teaching. And I use that phrase because sometimes you hear people say that Catholic social teaching started with Pope Leo XIII. Not really. I kind of started 2,000 years ago, if not more. But the modern tradition of these papal encyclicals that explicate and apply these principles in this way, yes, he inaugurated that kind of subset of the tradition. The fundamental anthropology that is proposed in Rerum Novarum and is built upon in all the subsequent social encyclicals, including this one, is that the primary unit of society is man and his family. It's always man and his family. And things, institutions, arrangements, etc., ought to be arranged relative to and measured relative to man and his family, because man's final end is the promotion of his family in relationship with God, right? Whereas like a Marxist socialist lens, to go back to, again, the framing from Rerum Novarum, is kind of the class, right? The proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And the liberal kind of libertarian lens is the individual, right? That Robinson Crusoe comes into existence on an island and he goes into contracts with people, and that's why you get like kind of the far off kind of libertarian idea that you can like sell your kids and you can sell yourself into slavery, or you can like sell your children, right? And it's very internally coherent if you start with an anthropology of the individual being the primary unit, but the primary unit is man and his family in relationship with God. Right. And you see that cited again in Magnifica Humanitas, is all of this needs to be measured against the family. Unemployment is a grave evil. That is one thing that is noted in the document, citing back to John Paul II's social encyclicals. Well, why is it a grave evil? Well, one, because work is a good thing for man. There's this beautiful explication on the nature of work at the beginning of Laborem Exercens, pulling back to the book of Genesis, that work also allows man not only to come into his own, but to provide for his family. And, Silas, to address some like concrete points, I do find it interesting in the encyclical, the Holy See essentially says we cannot endorse something like universal basic income, right? That's one of these ideas that's thrown out there that everyone's going to be unemployed, so we should just put everyone on welfare. And there's a line in the encyclical that says that welfare should be used in emergency situations, and pretty much only emergency situations. So between that and the heavy emphasis on subsidiarity and what the popes call these intermediary societies and associations, I think you get to something much more like a decentralized approach to the AI-related questions than anything else. I think it's a category error to say if it's either right or left.
Of course.
It's very much, it's just Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think right now it's fashionable in Catholic circles to be, using this line, well, we can't outsource our thinking to AI. And what I was thinking a lot during this encyclical is that Pope Leo doesn't give us the room to outsource our thinking to this document, or outsource our thinking to any podcast or news clip, right? Like I think sometimes we want to just find a justification for things we're already doing, when often the opposite is the case. These encyclicals challenge us to change. And so I'm less and less interested or impressed by any person's take on either side of either, here are all the ways I'm not using AI and I'm very proud of that, or here are all the ways I'm using AI and proud of that. I think like sitting in the middle and going, yeah, but how is Christ's teaching challenging you to think differently, to pray differently, to change how you're interacting with the world in light of this new age. And so that's much harder to do. It's a lot harder to kind of reconcile Claude and their approach to how they describe what AI is doing with the encyclical, right? But, you know, we're not going to find an easy path forward, especially when the document itself says that like definitions of AI are very, like it's impossible to come up with a definition of AI. So, I mean, we can't be looking for just something to affirm what we're already doing, right? Like an easy, okay, great, I'm good. I've read that I'm good. And so now I can just carry on. Like, I think we need to really push in the direction of what the document's calling for, which is like actively involved in rebuilding Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. The reason I partially asked the question too is for me personally, almost all of the document, I was like, oh yeah, I agree. This is great. This is great. This is great. And then there's a couple points where I'm like, oh, like he's really promoting the UN. I don't know if I like the UN that much. Like, I was like, okay, so I have to learn that this is probably my own perspective on it, because like the church in her wisdom has these takes which I should probably agree with, right? I'm pretty sure I have to agree with all these things, or I know it's not dogma, right? But I want to read through this and be like 100% whatever this is, like I'm going to go implement that as much as I can understand to. So that's why the reason I asked the question is because there is so much divide that it's easy for us to look at this and say, hey, you know, I like these things and I don't like these things, so I'm just going to reject those items and then you know, go with them. But usually that comes from like inserting your beliefs on top of the Pope's as if you're, you know, some expert more than he is. And the thing I've tried to encourage other people around me who have those takes is, you know, there might be a level deeper you're being called to understand that particular topic that you know, naturally, you know, you may not like it because you're on the right in America and you're sick of America having to fund everybody else's defense budget or something. I don't know. Like you might have various reasons why you're upset about that, but learn how to go deeper and focus on what he's really saying. So I'm kind of curious, what did you guys see as the, if any, like new Catholic social teaching? Was there anything that was really that stood out to you as like holy cow, that's totally different? I didn't expect that, or that's new, kind of in the discussion.
Should I go first? Zach would probably agree that maybe saying it's new. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this better. It's like it's not new. It's more like developments or like new ways that we're having it described to us at a very authoritative level. So what's interesting about these documents is often it's a very authoritative document from very high up in the church that is showing us how to apply like the principles, apply divine revelation to our age that we're in right now. Things that stand out that I know people are going to be talking a lot about are the ban and rejection of autonomous weapons, the conversation in the document on just war, and basically saying like it's virtually impossible now. Some other things for me that were interesting was not a clear, explicit definition of this in this way, but definitely language around the universal destination of goods being applied to digital goods. So now when my son has a character saved on a video game and one of his brothers just completely wipes it, he has a church document to turn to be like, hey, we have to be more kind about the universal destination of our digital goods here. So I thought those were some of the interesting parts of the document that much more clearly apply Catholic social teaching to the age.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think each of those are kind of interesting to dig into. The autonomous weapons section, I think, is interesting because I've seen some, I think, thoughtful back and forth with people on, you know, it doesn't seem like an explicit ban. It seems like more like a practical ban, saying you got to put all these conditions in that would make it very, very hard for them to actually be fully autonomous. But he could have just come out and given say, the use of autonomous weapons is gravely evil, right? Mm. It's always useful in these documents, the social teaching documents and the moral theology documents, to just control F for the word grave. Gravely, because that's a very important word from a Catholic moral theology perspective, right? You know, I think the just war thing has certainly gotten a lot of people talking. My read of it is that he's essentially saying the conditions that we have laid out for just war are such that people can use them to justify any kind of war, and that's clearly not what just war is trying to get at. I've had conversations with very traditionally minded friends of mine who will look at me and say, like, when was the last time the United States waged a just war? Like I have one friend who I was having a conversation about some current events with about just war theory, and he posed that question. He said, oh, well, you know, what about this one? He's like, maybe the War of 1812. And I think that's, there's clearly a tension here, but it can be developed in a way where when we understand the point of just war theory is the conditions under which there is legitimate self-defense and how that self-defense can be done. If you understand it that way, it's like, okay, well, we can develop this a little bit further. We can exploit these principles further. Because the reality is when two states go to war today, it's not like two kingdoms in medieval France going to war with each other, right? I did find that one interesting. I'm glad that Edmund mentioned the application of the universal destination of goods to intellectual property. That I do think was a very interesting development in the doctrine. And then, like I said, I was a little surprised to see the rejection of something like universal basic income. Again, when it's explained through the lens of the dignity of work, yeah, of course it makes sense, right? But it seems like one of these things that has been flirted with, certainly in the general conversation, but even within Catholic circles for a while. Mm-hmm. So that I would point out as quite interesting. Silas, you mentioned the UN section towards the very end on multilateralism, right? And yeah, the popes, since the establishment of the UN in the post-war period, they love the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? It's cited all the time in these encyclicals. Paul VI has this famous line that gets repeated time and time again of no war, no more war, right? And it's very easy to look at that and say, like, that's very Pollyannish, right? Of course, it's nice for the Pope to say that. Of course the Pope's going to say that, right? But if we're practical, if we're realistic, we understand there's going to be war, right? One thing that I was a little pleased to see in the document was a realistic evaluation of multilateralism and the United Nations as an opportunity for that. He says, we have to understand these institutions are clearly weaker than they would ideally be if you wanted to implement this form of multilateralism that the church talks about. One of the things we saw, I mean, we've seen this for years, but we saw this a lot during the Ukraine-Russia conflict under Pope Francis, was the Vatican's attempt at being a neutral multilateral institution, right? There seems to be this belief that if you just have like transnational institutions where people can have debate, dialogue, and discussion, you have these open lines of communication, that you can reduce the number of conflicts, right? And I think that's kind of the premise that they're working on. And to be fair to them too, I think we can point to some current events where if you just don't have open lines of communication, it's very, very hard to even get clear on when a conflict is going to end. And the first couple of weeks of the recent conflict in Iran, I think, are actually a pretty good example of that, where the president came out and said, yeah, we killed all their leaders, so we don't actually even know who's in charge right now. So to have those transnational organizations, again, I don't think it's right to look at it through a right or left lens, but just to look at it through a structural lens of like, if you believe dialogue, and again, that's one of their favorite words, if you believe in dialogue as a means towards peace, means towards peace on earth, right? Pacem in terris, then you need to have some sort of avenue through which that dialogue can happen.
Mm. Well, it is interesting because there's a lot of discussion about the whole premise, right, of the Tower of Babel versus the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and how Nehemiah wasn't some top-down centralized control system to rebuild the walls. He said, hey, like, grab your part of the wall and fix it. So everybody's being involved in the conversation. That was obviously mentioned a lot, is the population, let's say like the global south, who are not involved in the development of AI, like their voices should be heard. He references this a lot. And then he also references at the end in the building a civilization of love that we need to hear the testimony of the people affected by the negative outcomes of war. When we do all these things, then we can become more human through hearing the human struggles of other people, which is interesting, because if we had more of that genuine dialogue rather than just like political speak and like posturing, that what usually seems to happen in these circumstances, where China invites the Trump presidency to come and his cabinet there, and they're really just like, it's just for show, right? They're just like posturing the whole time. There's not a lot of like real stuff happening, because they invite Putin right after or whatever the situation was. I think if people had real personal dialogue and saw each other as humans, we would have more of this. But I just don't necessarily know how dealing with politicians who are probably mostly egomaniacs how that's going to really like actually affect something. But I did want to get your guys' take a little bit more on the universal destination of the digital goods, especially on data, because that to me just like hit me right between the eyes, that this is this seems like a very radical change in how companies would have to operate, because you especially hear the anybody in AI right now talking about how, AI is now a commodity. The only thing that's going to make it truly valuable is unique data sets. And then you have the Pope here saying like, hey, these things can't be prevented. So what is your guys' read on that, and what it actually means for, let's say, a startup, or whether it's an LLM or just like some startup that's collecting data, or any company for that matter? I'm just kind of curious if you guys have any understanding of how that should be practically applied.
Well, if I could just, I would love to set up Zach to comment on this, just to say some things I'm seeing signaled in the far edges of early adoption of AI in the AI community. I've felt for a while and kind of want to predict that personal data is going to be a huge topic moving forward, because very quickly as you start using AI, you start realizing that you get better answers the more you organize your own data and context. And very quickly you're seeing more complicated systems being built. You have, this is just an example. So Google recently released, I guess a easy way to say this is like a more structured way to manage knowledge databases. And knowledge databases are essentially what we're describing. So like personal databases, you have this huge movement of this thing called OpenClaw and these types of like do-it-yourself built databases. And what's interesting is also companies like Pinecone is a big database provider that lots of people will use and plug their agents into. And they also released a new layer that provides like a knowledge infrastructure, as well as seeing some of these. I saw just yesterday another social app that popped up that proposed like, hey, this is social media only with your friends and only like with whoever you want, and it's only chronological, so you're only seeing, like, you could, for example, create a social media app network with just 5 people and only see the things that they post. So I think we're going to start moving more and more in that direction, because individual consumers are going to see that you just get more you get better results from your prompts. You get, just in general, you're wanting to have more of that data. So I think it's going to be a huge topic moving forward. I think it's become easier and easier to just click a button and say, okay, I want to put a wall around my data, and I want this agent to only interact with my data. And we're going to be seeing more of this behavior, like what's happening in these AI communities, where you're just allowing certain kind of pipes to connect in, and you're deciding where you want your data to flow. So I think you'll also see situations where someone like Catholic Answers or other groups will allow people to plug into knowledge databases, or allow people to plug into data. So I think that's going to become more and more something we're actively involved in, and less of like, our data just gets extracted, and if you ever want maybe to download your data back from Facebook, you can. I think we're going to start owning that more. Obviously, there's tons of concerns about this and ways that people are not being treated justly, but that's at least like the movement I'm seeing even in the secular world.
If busyness and admin work are keeping you from growing your business, it's time to call Paraclete VA. We connect Catholic business owners with elite Catholic virtual assistants worldwide to handle your marketing, finance, and busy work. How it works is you pay $500 on the day they start, and if you're still happy after 30 days, you pay another $500. Most roles take less than 10 days to fill. To get started, just email admin@catholicfounders.com with a little bit about what you're looking for, so you can get back to doing what matters.
Yeah, I think that the Pope's concern here is the effect that the concentration of data has on solidarity and on the common good. One of the themes throughout the encyclical, especially towards the end, is this culture of power. And he talks a lot about it with respect to war, but I really think one of the themes you get away from, you can take away from this document, is a concern on concentration of power and concentration of decision-making, opacity in decision-making, things like that. So he's challenging us to think about, are there ways that these systems can be built that do not require the extraction of things that should belong to other people or do belong to other people for one's own benefit? The hard part there, I mean, I can just tell you from a business perspective, the hard part there is what is going to be your business model, right? The classic kind of consumer business model was you make a big real estate play and you just buy up all the land that you can, you get people inside your ecosystem, and then you advertise, right? And a lot of the AI systems are built on something very similar, where you try to get as much land as possible. And this is whether we're talking about an LLM or we're talking about like a SaaS tool that uses an LLM to process data. You get as much real estate as possible, digital real estate as possible, because then you can fine tune what you're working on to make make your system more accurate. But you're doing that by taking data from other people, right? And the challenge is going to be one of two things. Either you're going to have to be more comfortable with building a business that might not be as big as it otherwise would be, right? And you're going to have to be competing with your secular mercenary competitors, right? Or you're going to have to develop new business models that can make money in ways that are not purely built on either momentum from the data flywheel or selling data. And both those, I think, are quite difficult. I can tell you my firm has done very few software investments in the last couple of years, in large part because I think the default is...
Software is, I do not envy anyone working at a software company right now, because the way things are shipping so fast. I mean, Anthropic puts out like a new feature update every week. OpenAI, same thing. Like it's moving so fast, and I think we're going to see really quickly. I was talking with someone who maybe I shouldn't say they work at Google, but someone who works at Google or is aware, allegedly, and they were saying they're already talking about how the software is just going to be like, you're just going to interact with an AI on your phone, and you're just going to say, hey, these are the types of things I want to do, and it's just going to create the software and tools and apps that you need right there. I think the business model that a lot of people are predicting is that it's data centers, compute, and then it's the LLM. And I think there's all this conversation by these frontier AI model founders about compute and intelligence being like a utility, and it's already kind of being treated that way. Andrej Karpathy, who's an OpenAI co-founder, he worked at Tesla. Now I think he's at Anthropic. But he gave a talk at Y Combinator where he said this. I mean, he had slides where he's like, AI is already kind of been being treated like compute. If you have data centers go down, or if you have servers go down, or a model go down, lots of people can't do work anymore. So I think it's going to be that kind of hose that is turned on or off, or you just pay the subscription for the one model, and then you're kind of charged based on compute. Another thing that's interesting is this move towards MCP servers, or just like these back-end connectors. So for people who aren't as tech-minded, just like imagine you have a subscription to an AI model, and then you're just clicking on or off things that sound like software, right? So you're clicking on or off Asana, or you're clicking on or off the ability for your tool to scrape web data through a third party, right? And so there's all these third-party tools that get kind of connected in the background that you're able to connect to, and they're charging you on, they're charging you cents at a time. And I think that's some conversation I'm hearing along the lines of a lot of these AI groups about, like, in the future, there's the models are more those like couple cents per tokens or whatever that get charged in the background. And so, anyways, getting too nerdy, but
there's two things I would add on that I think Edmund raised that I think are noteworthy, from both in terms of, we can think about the business application and just where the landscape sits right now. And then also something, Silas, you asked, like, what was a surprise in the document, right? On the first, I would say, like, I've talked to investors who do almost entirely software investing, and I've asked them, like, how are you thinking about this, right? My firm does investing across lots of different categories. I'll hear software pitches. I've done a few software. And when I was talking to one of these investors about this recently, he gave me a very honest answer, but I could tell the guy was sweating bullets, because they were very concerned about how this could be an existential risk to their business. And his answer was something along the lines, and there is a connection here to the intellectual property point, and maybe part of the intellectual property takeaway for just business owners and normal people is to understand that when you are giving these things up, you are giving up some of your property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think there's going to be software that's very vertical specific, where companies do not want to divulge their data.
Yes.
Now, there are other companies working on, like, how do we anonymize that data, right? So they can feel comfortable divulging it, but they may not want to divulge things like formulae that they want to then feed into Claude, right? Where then Claude is going to be training on their proprietary formulae. So I think there's a push and pull that can happen here. If you're a software founder thinking about how do I respect people's data, that's one thing. And I think innovation on those business models would be very interesting to see. There have been attempts at that over the last decade, some in the crypto space, for example, where people are compensated with micropayments for giving up some of their data. None of those really took off. But then there's also part of the push and pull, I think, is also if you're a business owner who's using software, or if you're just a consumer, maybe be a little bit more territorial over your data and understand you are giving up some of your property when you give something to these companies. The second point I would raise, and I'm glad that Edmund mentioned data centers. One of the things I was kind of shocked by is I think data centers are really only mentioned 2 or 3 times in the document. And if you look at a lot of the public discourse around AI, it's not very good. It's not very well informed. I'm convinced a ton of it is propaganda from both sides. But you'll see a huge concern over the resource consumption of data centers. And that is called out in the document. But I think it's notable, A, it's not catastrophized as much as it easily could have been, which lets me know that, okay, there are actually informed parties contributing to the development of this document, which that's good to see. And then 2, the call to action from the Holy Father is to develop more sustainable technologies.
Yeah,
it's
I like that a
not
lot.
necessarily to tear the data centers down or to not build them. It might involve being more thoughtful in how they are built, but it's not even, his first response is not even regulation. It is to develop more sustainable technologies. And I think that is a hugely important takeaway for founders, makers, and scientists who are thinking about this. In a sense, you kind of have a mandate from the church to go and develop more sustainable technologies so that we can build these data centers in a way that are not.
Yeah, I really want to bring up John Johnson. He was on our panel yesterday, and he's an example of a Catholic who, I mean, man, the episode we did one-on-one with him, he went deep into the apocalyptic vision of some of these tech founders. Like he's deeply trained in philosophy and church teaching, but he started Patmos, which is it's a data center company, and so he has built this around ethical principles that he feels are in line with Catholic church teaching. So, and he had mentioned just the word data center is very charged. So obviously he's catching some stray bullets on that, but he brought up like Zak's point exactly, which is like, look, we're trying to build like sustainable, ethical, good data centers that you can trust to put your data on, and that you're not going to get blacklisted or something for something that you believe. So anyways, it brings up tons of interesting conversations around that.
Yeah, I recently learned that data centers pull worse than ice.
Yeah, it's really bad in the US.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very bad.
They are politically radioactive.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm still not sure how to think about these because I've seen, like you said, so many what seems like it can't be true data about or like social media clips either way from either side. But I did really personally appreciate the perspective that the Pope literally kind of called to technology as that solution to it, like more technology and better technology. Obviously, I work in clean tech and sustainability tech, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I did like that part. But
Yeah,
I did, yeah. So now I guess I want to. I know I'm going back to this again, but from your perspective, Zak, are there? Let's say a company is like collecting data that's proprietary that allows them to help customers I don't know, buy and sell different things more effectively or more efficiently. Is that data not going to be like included as, hey, this is universal destination of goods type of data versus like other stuff that might be collected on like a mass population perspective? Because I wanted to understand if there is literally like, should anybody not build a startup that is involved in just collecting data and using that as their product, or is it just certain types of data?
Well, if we look at paragraph 67, which is in the section on the universal destination of goods, it says, today, among the goods that are universally intended for everyone, right, we must also include new forms of property such as patents, algorithms, digital platforms, technological infrastructure, and data. Which is not even necessarily like the private property is a function of the universal destination of goods, right? That's established, made very clear in Rerum Novarum, developed elsewhere by other popes like John Paul II. But the idea of the universal destination of goods is that we are given stewardship of goods, but those goods are not ours, right? The Catholic case for private property is not the libertarian or liberal natural rights case for private property. It is a practical case for private property. The church is also very clear that there is no, what's the language that they use? Essentially, there's no absolute right to private property, right? So you are the steward of your intellectual property is essentially the takeaway here. But why does that intellectual property exist? So it's almost more of a case for open source than it is anything else. So I would argue, if you're in the position where you can choose between an open source approach to the data, that what you're developing, versus a closed approach to it, that the exhortation here is towards open source, which again is ironic kind of in the in the AI discussions, because OpenAI is the very closed source. If anything, at least in this section, I think the winner that comes out on top, ironically, given other things related to private data, is Meta, who is taking the more open source approach to the development of this kind of intellectual.
Yeah, there was that is ironic considering the rest of the digital attention.
I mean, there's a lot of, depending on how you want to read this document, I don't think that there are a lot of axes being grind here personally. I love when people say that the Pope goes out and talks about peace in Africa, and people are like, he's attacking the president. And it's like, no, actually, I think the Pope lives rent free in your brain on that topic. But there was a number of different sections here where if you go in thinking he's talking about this, there are a number of ironic sections in the document. So for example, one that I find interesting is you see a lot of people saying that he's attacking Palantir, both on the surveillance section and by quoting Tolkien. Again, I think that's probably reading too much into it. But one of the ironies here is one of the only companies I've seen consistently talk about retraining people and partnering with labor unions is Palantir. So there's a lot of ways I think you can read these things both ways.
Yeah, I did find that fascinating, that there's a lot of times, I guess it depends on what part of the internet you live in, but you could basically read through it and you're like, I read the person's name or the company's name as he's saying. I'm I specifically in my summary episode I mentioned Brian Johnson with the whole transhumanism thing, right? And I was just it's very fascinating to me how he's very diplomatic about it, not calling out particular people. But were you going to add to that, Edmund? You're gonna say something?
Yeah, I think the data and intellectual property topic in particular is going to be really fascinating moving forward. I've been saying for a while now that intellectual property is going to be a huge part of people's business models, because if you think about it, more and more as we go to a world where you just have a bar open and you can ask a question, it's easier to say Pat Lencioni's working genius, right? That's a name that you can put out there. It's intellectual property. It's a framework, right? And I think there's going to be tension on both sides, the decision to put out publicly your intellectual property so that people are aware of it and it enters into these models and people can discover you. But there's also, a case to be made for holding some of that back and having a little more control over where people need to go or what they need to connect to in order to have it. So for example, I'm developing my own intellectual property around communication and cordial communication, and I'm wondering is there parts of the framework, parts of the methodology that I don't put on YouTube or don't put out there, so that these large language models or these AI companies aren't just able to extract all of that and just spread it out, and there's no economic advantage to me, or there's no I guess like Zach was saying, there's no real business model. For example, I know tons of people that do this. I do this as well, where you can very easily hook up Claude to a YouTube channel. It transcribes every video, and now you have data that you can interact with, name your YouTube channel that you really go to for advice on how to build apps or et cetera. So that's an interesting tension. And I know in one of the past episodes on the Faith and AI project, they talked about that, about how, should the Vatican just release all of its library and archives and have it transcribed into data, or should those things be walled off so that you can kind of control who has access and in what capacity? I think it's a very interesting question as people are thinking about, if they're in more of that knowledge space where they're developing intellectual property. But even if they're not, I think it's important to be thinking about that.
I almost wonder if there's something to be said too about the idea of the nature of work, where it's if you develop IP, yes, it's work and you put it in, but it then can become, let's call it like a passive income source, like you sell a course or something like that, where you're not, you put in the work one time, but maybe deep down there's this like future where we understand that the best work in the dignified work that is actual work of like maybe working with other people and coaching them or training them and providing another service rather than just the IP, right? I'm not gonna like try to speculate on that too much, but that's something that kind of popped to my mind as you're talking about that. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I was pretty fascinated to hear to read the part where it basically mentioned that credit is a good for it's kind of is in some ways necessary for people, because he was actually saying like we want to be careful that AI is not just determining somebody can't get credit because they weren't baked into the design process. That to me seems like a little bit counterintuitive, given that a lot of people talk. It's a very common topic in Catholic circles about usury and not lending and charging interest. So I'm kind of curious if you guys had any takes on that.
Yeah, Zach, I'd be interested also I would love to hear what Zach has to say about this, especially in light of, I think maybe is around this topic is China having that like social credit as well. I'm wondering if there's something baked into that word about even the social credit score in China. And I think there's been talk of other, I don't know, countries or thinking about going in that direction. So I'm not sure if that's related as well.
If you're a Catholic business owner, you should not be building alone. Join the Catholic Founders Guild at CatholicFounders.com/subscribe. For $10 a month, you can join a group of Catholic founders who are dedicated to bringing the culture back to God. Don't build alone. Join the Catholic Founders Guild today.
Silas, I think you're referencing paragraph 160, which if I can just read it aloud, because I think there's a lot in here that we can kind of parse apart. In recent years, finance has increased in importance and has undergone significant innovation, driven partly by the introduction of cryptocurrencies. So there's this weird kind of throwaway line about crypto. And as a quick aside, I think one of the things encyclicals do is they kind of introduce topics as like, this is something the church wants to talk about. So you can cite back to the encyclical later when you do something, say, if you're at the DDF or somewhere else, or at the DIHD, and you're developing something. So you can say, well, Magnifica Humanitas 160 talked about the introduction of crypto. The reflections and observations contained in the teaching of my predecessors, particularly in their encyclicals, have highlighted how the financial intermediation sector, when operating without the necessary anthropological and moral foundations, has not only produced manifest abuses and injustices, but also demonstrated a capacity to create systematic and worldwide economic crises. And then I think it links to a DDF document on that. Of note, people can read that and they're like, oh, that sounds kind of red, right? It's like, actually, one of the encyclicals that talks a lot about that is Benedict XVI, and I think Caritas in Veritate, where people don't tend to view Benedict XVI as very red. Again, just shows how by red, I mean like Marxist. The right-left kind of paradigm doesn't really work on Catholic analysis very well. It is likewise the case that income from capital risks replacing income from labor, which is often confined to the margins of the economic system's primary interests. Yet savings transformed into credit for the real economy, thereby creating both jobs and self-employed work, remains central for development and the investments that must accompany ongoing transitions. The social function of credit remains irreplaceable. Finance for its own sake is fundamentally different from finance aimed at the development, creation, and evolution of work. And again, what I would point people to, if they're really interested in that, is probably both Centesimus Annus by John Paul II and Caritas in Veritate by Benedict XVI. Both of them talk about the role of finance in economic development and the challenges related in that. So a couple of things I would pull apart there is this last line: finance for its own sake is fundamentally different from finance aimed at the development, creation, and evolution of work. So the church accepts that finance, credit, etc., these are things that are going to exist. These are things that exist in the world today. How are they used and what are they for? Are they for the production of meaningful work? There's this line in Centesimus Annus that's something like, every investment is a moral decision, right? About what that money is going to go to. Essentially saying that that money can go towards providing meaningful work for people. Again, think about the anthropology. The anthropology is man and his family. Man and his family being able to provide for the family so that the family can work towards its final end, which is God, right? And if finance assists with that, ceteris paribus, by providing meaningful work, that is a different kind of thing than if I'm just speculating on something purely just to make more money out of it. And I think that's I would assume that's kind of the connection to cryptocurrencies that's put in here, because a lot of crypto, especially if we think about like certain kind of tokens, it's literally just like I buy it, it goes up, I sell it, right? People can debate about the intricacies of Bitcoin and its relation to energy and mining, but a lot of it's just like you buy some Dogecoin, you expect Elon Musk to mention Doge on a Saturday Night Live appearance, and then you sell it, right? There's no economic, there's no real world economic development that's happening there. I'm sorry.
100%. And later, when it says it is likewise the case that income from capital risks replacing income from labor, which is often confined to the margins of the economic system's primary interests. Like, to me, that reminded me of conversations about the disparity between the stock market and the investment portfolios being, just skyrocketing. But yet, I think there was some conversations around the gross domestic product of the US has not changed in proportion to that. That we might not be necessarily producing much more. It's just we have massive companies in Silicon Valley whose valuation inflates and makes a bunch of people much richer. But like Zak's point is making, what is the tangible effect on people's either their work or their lives? Like, it's just a valuation boom. So that was interesting that called that out so specifically.
For me particularly,
on the usury point, Silas, I mean, that I think we could talk probably for 5 hours about that and probably not come to particularly helpful conclusions for people who are very interested in that. I think it's noteworthy, though, that clearly the church accepts that there is going to be credit. Now, is credit usury? That's the moral theology kind of question that we can kind of table here. But there is going to be financial credit, savings transformed into credit, that will then be used for things. And what is it used for? Is it used to give people meaningful work and then to allow those who are doing the investments to also work? Or is it just being used for people to just make like passive income off of things that are not actually resulting in meaningful work? Again, it's a philosophy of work question, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is the through that section and then other parts where it's talking about the importance of, well, it mentions in there in 160 the development of the society, but also there's other sections where it's talking about for the dignity of work. And to me, that's really pointing out that I like to refer to it as ROI maxing is not the purpose, right? It's not the purpose of being an entrepreneur. It shouldn't be, at least. It shouldn't be the purpose behind making an investment, because if you're doing it just to make more money, that in itself is basically, at least in my words, that's just pure greed, right? You're just doing it only to make money. And this is the thing I have a struggle with. I think a lot of people in my generation are very frustrated by, is that the private equity firms coming in, buying all the single family homes and making it impossible for people to buy, like all of this and other things where the product quality is being lower because they're like, hey, we can cut out something here or there and we'll make more ROI in the short term. In the long term, obviously the product itself is crappier, it falls apart faster, and the total brand value eventually goes down too. But to me, it was an encouraging thing that we should naturally understand as entrepreneurs, as Catholics, that we're here to not just like make money. We're not just here to get a lot of money and then buy a Lamborghini or something. We're here to develop and help the people around us and employ people and help them live with their family. Like the core central unit of society is the family, as you mentioned before. So that was just very encouraging to me.
I think that's right. I would encourage your listeners, go read section 36 of Centesimus Annus. This last paragraph here, I think, essentially says that, and it's maybe 5 or 6 sentences, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but what I referenced earlier is he says, the decision to, and this is John Paul II, the decision to invest in one place rather than another and one productive sector rather than another is always a moral and cultural choice. And that's italicized in the original document. Given the utter necessity of certain economic conditions and of political stability, the decision to invest, that is, to offer people an opportunity to make good use of their own labor, that's his definition of invest, is also determined by an attitude of human sympathy and trust in providence, which reveal the human quality of the person making such decisions. So saying your decision to invest in a way that offers people an opportunity to make good use of their own labor reveals the human quality of you as somebody who's doing that.
Yeah, that is good. I think the last core thing I want to cover before we run out of time here is Especially to me, the thing that probably stood out the most is his continuous, basically ask for everybody to participate. I think in almost every chapter he referenced something about like no matter how little you are or how insignificant you might be in the grand scheme of the world, right? You have a role to play in picking up your tools and building the wall. And then he makes this really nice conclusion at the end where he talks about the construction site of our time and how we all have to pick up our tools and build our component of the wall if we're going to build a civilization of love. I would comment that I think, especially in America, our society is one of consumption now instead of participation. And I'm curious, on a macro level, but also on an individual level, how can we encourage our neighbors? How can we ourselves pick up our tools and be participants in building this future rather than just tweeting about it and complaining about how things are bad? What do you guys think about how we individually can do this and how we can encourage others around us to pick up our tools?
Throughout the modern Catholic social teaching tradition of the popes talking to the modern world. And those institutions are things that I think if we look around us, to your point on consumption, they've kind of been destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I find that interesting on the temple example. A friend of mine pointed out to me in the example of the Tower of Babel, you're building something new. In the temple of the rebuilding of Jerusalem, that we didn't get too much into, but to develop all these institutions around the family that exist for that kind of like push and pull in that power dynamic. And those could be, they could be big things like you go start a new company, or you go become a legislator or a regulator, or you go become a churchman or something. But it could also be that you develop the associations in your community to help retrain people. Right? Or the associations in your community to help people get off their phones and go engage in conversation with other people to see that maybe we're not actually at the verge of civil war like all these videos that I saw scrolling on TikTok showed me that it might be. Right? At one point he says that we should just go waste time with each other. Right?
Yeah,
Where do you do that now? Right? There's this kind of idea, there's this idea of essay from, I think, the 90s on if you look at bowling associations through the 20th century, there's this huge decline in them, right? Where it used to be guys and girls would go out and they'd bowl together, right, as a social club. And now it's much more somebody just goes out by themselves when he's writing the article, right? We are now scrolling alone, right? So he wants to get us out to go talk to people, to engage with people, to help people find meaningful work, to do meaningful work ourselves, to remember things. Memory is a big common repeated word in the document. To remember things together, to desire things together, to suffer together, to love together. And we could list off a list of things you can do with that, but I think that is really like something that whether you're a stay-at-home mom with your kids, or you're the CEO of a large company, there's a lot of things you can do with that. And it's go out and engage people, whatever that might mean for you.
Yeah, I would want to leave people with two stories that kind of highlight my thoughts on this and what I'm reading in the Encyclical. So on the one hand, there's over 15, I think, currently Catholic AI things being developed, and so I mean there's plenty, so it's okay for me to say this way. I was talking with one Catholic AI founder and was very interested in the process of him developing it, and I asked him, what catechetical methodology did you use when training your model? And he said, well, that's above my pay grade, but we just make sure that it's orthodox. Like, we have an advisor and we just make sure it's orthodox. And I remember thinking like, well, that seems like a missed opportunity. I was kind of just grieved.
It seems like the thing that
and I was like, well, but just saying it's orthodox, I mean, there's an Augustinian approach to catechesis. There are many orthodox approaches. There's catechesis of the Good Shepherd is very different than the ecclesial method of Francis Kelly. Like there's so many orthodox approaches, and we should be a little more transparent about those things. On the other hand, another story was with a Catholic president of a classical school, Chesterton Academy, and I was asking him, like, wow, this is a very impressive school. Like, how has this age of AI, impacted, the school, or how you're thinking about the school? And he said, oh, not at all. Like, we have no AI in the classrooms. We actually have no technology in the classrooms. We don't even have smart boards or anything in the classrooms. And again, on the other hand, I was like, oh man, kind of a missed opportunity here, because even if you don't use AI in the classrooms, I mean, even if you try to separate yourself from it, which is a virtuous thing that they're trying, like, it does change the world that these students are living in. It changes the environment that their families are living in. It changes what's going to happen after school. So on both hands, right, like, you see this need for transparency and engaging more. I think if you're building AI, like, be more transparent. Like, Claude is producing their constitution and they put it up for public debate, like, in transparency. Here's how we're trying to build our values into these systems. Like, if you build a Catholic AI, put out, what models you're using behind the scenes, make it more transparent. If you're a parent, like, ask yourself, even if you don't want to allow your kids to use AI, ask yourself, how does this AI world change the context that we're living in? Like, how do we act like Christ in this AI world? If you're a teacher, think as well about that. Like, how does this change the way our students need to be equipped for that AI world? And then if you're an individual, like, I think we have to think more, we have to engage more with these processes and not just think, oh, well, this is just an advanced search tool. Like, I think we have to be more engaged, because Pope Francis in the document says AI is not neutral, technology is never neutral. He places the moral and ethical responsibility not just on the people who fund it or build it, but also on the users. And so I don't think we can just passively use these tools. I think we need to be more engaged in how we're using them and thinking a little deeper about what, towards the end, he mentions, like, is this helping us become more Christ-like? Are we building Jerusalem? Are we participating in something that contributes to human flourishing for ourselves individually or for the broader community we're a part of?
Yeah. I think it's a good place to end it. I would love to talk more on this. I think we could probably talk for hours and hours on many of the different components here. It'll be something I'll be continuing to produce content on in the coming months about. But the last thing for me would be that I did really appreciate his mention that technology itself is one of the talents that we're granted. And I was thinking a lot about the fact that we were intentionally put in this time of history to use the things that are at our disposal. So it's not in some ways you could say that he's kind of a condemnation in some ways of the Benedictine option for the average person. I would say that might be too strong of a statement, but I think that we all have to recognize this as an opportunity to evangelize, and there's a way to evangelize through the technology. We can use the tools for that are in our time, and our own journey of sanctification is intentionally set up to be in this time of history. We weren't accidentally born in the 21st century, like, right, in this era. So we can lean into that. And then personally, I think everybody, regardless if you are a line worker at a factory or if you are developing AI models, we can all go and knock on our neighbor's door and invite them over for dinner. Like, everybody can do that. Everybody can start to develop an actual trust-based society where they recognize their human brothers that live amongst them. Because, like, I just moved to Nashville not that many months ago, and we have a couple neighbors that we know, but, like, we have also been slacking and inviting them over for dinner, right? And we can do this a lot better if we want to rebuild this human connection component. So I know we're out of time. Thank you guys so much for coming on. If you guys ever want to hash out any more top discussion points on this, I'm welcome to. You guys can come on anytime you want. So
yeah, this was very enjoyable. Thanks, man.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this discussion today. Again, if you enjoyed it and you want to hear more from the group that we had on today, please comment below or reach out directly to me, and I can invite them back on and we can continue the discussion. There's obviously a lot more to cover. If you've read the encyclical, you know that. We really only scratched the surface. If you also have perspectives of your own on the encyclical, feel free to send me an email or a voice memo. I'll love to hear it. I think this is a very collaborative effort of us all understanding and figuring out how to integrate and implement a lot of the things that we've learned in this document into how we run our businesses. And by the way, if you are not already, please do me a big favor and follow us on YouTube or subscribe to us on YouTube. We are aggressively trying to grow that channel so that the natural, algorithm and everything can work to our favor to help get us in front of other people and get this content in front of other people so that we can all, do a better job of building as good Catholics. And then, as an FYI, our next episode is going to be with Juan Dominguez, the Substacker behind Simple Man, which he actually recently rebranded to Ad Eternum. So stay tuned for that conversation in the coming days. And then finally, if you are a Catholic builder and want to be surrounded by more amazing builders, what are you waiting for? Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. It's only $100 a year, so anybody can afford it. All you got to do is go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe and sign up. It's very easy, pretty straightforward. Substack can be a little confusing if you're not familiar with it, but just go there, drop in your payment information, and we will get you on the calendar. We'll meet and we'll include you in the guild. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Catholic Founders, and do not forget that you were created to create. God bless and happy building.